Okay, so picture this. You're miles out at sea, working a physically demanding job, and bam, you're hit with a sudden life-threatening medical emergency.
Oh, wow.
That's exactly what happened to Filipino seaman Jolly Carandan. Just 3 months into his contract, he suffered a massive heart attack while on duty aboard his ship,
Oh, no.
called the MV favorization.
Ah, shit.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, you might be thinking heart attacks happen, but this story goes way beyond a simple medical incident.
Right.
It sparked a years-long legal battle that went all the way to the highest court in the Philippines.
Wow, so this is a big deal.
It is.
Okay.
What makes this case so fascinating is that it dives headfirst into the complexities of proving work-related illness, especially in demanding fields like seafaring, and the legal protections, or lack thereof, for workers. And that's exactly what we're taking a deep dive into today. We're dissecting a landmark Supreme Court decision from the Philippines, case number GR num 252195, which grapples with these very issues. We're talking pre-existing conditions, work-related illnesses, and who bears the burden of proof when it comes to a seaman's right to disability benefits.
Okay.
So let's start by getting a clearer picture of Jolly Carandan's situation. He signed on as an able seaman, which, trust me, is no walk in the park. We're talking backbreaking labor, day in and day out.
Right. And to make matters even more challenging, he was just 3 months into his contract when this heart attack occurred. This timeline becomes incredibly important later on when we're talking about his health prior to employment.
Right, because like most seafarers, Carandan signed a standard Philippine Overseas Employment Administration contract, the POEASEC,
Right.
which dictates things like pre-existing conditions and what happens if someone gets sick or injured on the job. We'll unpack the POEASEC more as we go, but for now, let's get back to that fateful incident on the high seas. So there Carandan was, just 3 months into his contract, going about his duties when he suddenly collapses. Full-blown cardiac arrest.
Oh, my God.
This wasn't just a minor health scare. This was serious. He required immediate medical attention and was rushed to Germany, where he underwent a battery of tests.
Germany.
Imagine being thousands of miles from home and suddenly facing a life-threatening condition like that.
Yeah, that's terrifying. And to make matters worse, the diagnosis was grim.
So Carandan was diagnosed with coronary artery disease and myocardial infarction.
Okay.
Now, to break that down for our listeners, coronary artery disease essentially means his heart wasn't getting enough blood flow. And the myocardial infarction refers to the heart attack itself, damage to the heart muscle due to that lack of blood.
Right.
He had to undergo coronary angiography, a procedure used to visualize the heart's arteries, and PCI stenting, where tiny tubes are inserted to prop open blocked arteries, allowing blood to flow more freely.
Wow, that's some serious stuff.
Yeah.
So obviously his seafaring days are over at this point. And he is sent back to the Philippines to continue treatment.
Right.
But this is where the story takes a turn, right? Because it's not just about the heart attack anymore. It's about what caused it.
Exactly. And this is where things get really interesting. You have Carandan, who insists he's never had any heart problems before in his life. He passed his pre-employment medical exam with flying colors and had no reason to suspect anything was wrong.
Okay.
But then you have the company, who comes back with a very different perspective. They allege that Carandan concealed a pre-existing condition, specifically a previous diagnosis of hypertension. And they claim to have a medical report from 2012 to back it up.
Oh, wow. So they're saying he had high blood pressure years before this job and never disclosed it.
They are.
If true, that could seriously jeopardize his chances of receiving disability benefits, right?
Absolutely. If they could prove Carandan intentionally withheld crucial medical information, it could completely change the course of his case.
Right.
However, there's a catch.
Okay, I'm on the edge of my seat. What's the catch?
The company never actually produces this so-called 2012 medical report as evidence.
Really?
They claim to have it, but it's never presented in court.
Wow. So we have a seaman who suffered a career-ending heart attack on the job, conflicting stories about his medical history, and a potentially damning piece of evidence that seems to have vanished into thin air.
It's about to get even more complicated.
I knew it.
So we've got a missing medical report, conflicting stories, and a whole lot at stake for Jolly Carandan.
Right.
Where do we even go from here?
This is where the Philippine legal system, specifically the framework surrounding seafarer rights, comes into play. As we mentioned earlier, Carandan was working under the POEASEC contract, which has specific clauses about pre-existing conditions, work-related illnesses, and importantly, disability
It's like
benefits.
those terms and conditions we all scroll past. But
Yeah.
in this case, they're absolutely crucial for determining what happens to Carandan. So what does the POEAAC actually say about these situations?
Well, for starters, it emphasizes the role of the company-designated doctor, who has the authority to assess a seafarer's fitness for work. But here's the important part. If there's any disagreement about the diagnosis or the assessment, the seafarer has the right to a second opinion from a doctor of their choosing.
So it's not a one-sided thing where the company doctor has the final say. Carandan could have gotten a second opinion if he wanted to.
Precisely. And he did just that, which adds another layer of complexity to this already tangled web. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's back up and retrace the steps of this legal battle, because it's a bit of a roller coaster ride.
Okay, so take us through the twists and turns. It sounds like this wasn't a simple open and shut case.
Not at all. Initially, the case went before a panel of voluntary arbitrators, the PVA, for short, and they actually ruled in Carandan's favor.
Wow.
They weren't convinced by the company's claims of concealment, particularly since that 2012 report never materialized.
Round one goes to Carandan.
Right.
But it doesn't end there, does it?
Unfortunately, no. The company appealed the PVA's decision, taking the case to the Court of Appeals, and this time, the court sided with the company. They argued that Carandan hadn't been entirely forthcoming with his medical history, pointing to some inconsistencies in different medical forms regarding past instances of chest pains.
Wait a minute, but didn't Carandan get cleared by the company doctor before he even set foot on the ship?
That's a key point that Carandan and his legal team raised, and it's something that the Supreme Court later agreed with. It's important to remember that the Supreme Court is the highest court in the Philippines, so their decision on this matter is final.
Okay, so we've got the initial ruling in Carandan's favor, then the Court of Appeals siding with the company, and finally the Supreme Court steps in. This is where it all comes to a head, right? What did the Supreme Court decide?
The Supreme Court's decision is where things get really interesting, not just for Carandan's case, but for seafarer rights in the Philippines in general. They actually overturned the Court of Appeals decision and ruled in Carandan's favor, awarding him full disability benefits.
Wow, a complete reversal. What was their reasoning? What made them side with Carandan?
Their reasoning was multifaceted and incredibly significant from a legal standpoint. First and foremost, they agreed that there was simply no credible evidence to support the company's claims of deliberate concealment. Remember that missing 2012 report?
Right.
The Supreme Court basically said, if you're going to accuse someone of hiding something, you need to show us the proof. They also emphasized that Carandan had passed his pre-employment medical exam without any red flags and had no symptoms before starting the job.
So no proof of concealment. That's a big one. What else swayed the Supreme Court?
This is where that POEASEC contract we mentioned earlier comes back into play. The Supreme Court highlighted that the company had a legal obligation to provide Carandan with a definitive assessment of his condition within a specific time frame, either 120 days from repatriation if the illness is treatable, or 240 days if it's not. This is crucial because if the company fails to provide this assessment within the allotted time, the law presumes the seafarer to be totally and permanently disabled.
So even though the company never officially declared Carandan permanently disabled, the fact that they didn't provide a timely assessment worked against them.
Exactly. It's a provision designed to protect seafarers from being left in limbo while companies drag their feet on medical evaluations. The legal term for this is constructive total and permanent disability.
That's fascinating. It's like the company's inaction ended up hurting their case,
Yeah.
but they also acknowledged the extreme nature of his job, right? They didn't ignore the fact that he had this massive heart attack while on duty.
Absolutely not. The Supreme Court was very clear in acknowledging the incredibly stressful and physically demanding nature of Carandan's work. In fact, they even referenced a previous case describing seafarers as constantly plagued by homesickness and worry, highlighting the mental and emotional toll that this line of work can take, which could potentially manifest physically.
It's easy to get caught up in the legal back and forth and forget about the human cost, the stress and hardship that someone like Carandan endured. So the Supreme Court considered the nature of his work, the lack of evidence, and this constructive disability concept. It sounds like a clear-cut victory for Carandan. But what does this win actually mean for him?
It means he gets his disability benefits. The Supreme Court recognized the toll this ordeal took on him and ensured he would be compensated fairly. But even more importantly, this case sets a powerful precedent for other seafarers in the Philippines. It clarifies the burden of proof in cases like this and reinforces the protections afforded to them by the POEASEC contract.
This isn't just about one man and his heart attack. It's about a system that often fails to protect its most vulnerable workers. It's about holding companies accountable and ensuring that seafarers, who risk their lives every day in incredibly challenging conditions, are guaranteed the rights and protections they deserve.
Precisely. This case shines a light on the broader issue of work-related illnesses, which can be notoriously difficult to prove, especially in physically demanding fields like seafaring.
This case really highlights just how crucial those worker protections are. I mean, imagine if Carandan hadn't had the POEA SEC on his side.
Right.
What then?
It's a chilling thought, isn't it? This case wasn't just a victory for Carandan. It was a watershed moment for seafarer rights in the Philippines. It sent ripples throughout the maritime industry, reminding companies that they can't simply make vague allegations about pre-existing conditions without solid evidence.
Yeah, it's a powerful reminder that these contracts have real teeth, and they're there for a reason.
Absolutely. The Supreme Court's decision was a clear message that the burden of proof lies with the employer and that these contracts exist to protect workers, particularly when it comes to something as fundamental as health and well-being.
And they didn't shy away from acknowledging the incredibly harsh realities of life at sea, did they?
Not at all. The court recognized the immense pressure, the physical demands, and even the emotional toll that this profession takes on individuals. They didn't just look at Carandan's heart attack in isolation, they saw it within the context of his work environment, a factor that's often overlooked in cases like this.
Yeah, it's easy to forget about the human cost when you're dealing with legal jargon and contractual obligations, but this case brings that human element back into focus.
It forces us to ask bigger questions. What responsibility do companies have to create a work environment that doesn't exacerbate these risks? If they're mandated to provide a workplace conducive to maintaining health, as the POEASEC states, shouldn't they be doing everything in their power to minimize the inherent dangers of jobs like seafaring?
Right, it's about more than just ticking boxes and complying with regulations. It's about a fundamental respect for the well-being of your workforce.
Precisely. And that brings us to the heart of what this deep dive has been about. The complexities of proving work-related illness, the crucial role that legal frameworks like the POEA-SEC play in protecting workers, and the ongoing struggle to hold employers accountable for the well-being of their employees.
This case is a stark reminder that these battles are far from over. Seafarers and countless other individuals in demanding professions continue to face an uphill battle when it comes to proving the link between their work and their health. But as Jolly Carandan's story demonstrates, perseverance, coupled with a robust legal framework and a commitment to fighting for one's rights, can lead to justice.
It's a reminder that we should never underestimate the power of a single case to bring about meaningful change. What started as one seaman's fight for his rights has evolved into a landmark decision with the potential to shape the future of worker protections, not just in the Philippines, but across the globe.
So the next time you hear a story about someone struggling to prove that their illness is work-related, remember Jolly Carandan. Remember the human cost of these battles, the importance of strong legal protections, and the power we all have to demand better for ourselves and